So hello YouTube, and welcome to our first episode of our mini-series of We All Had to Start Somewhere. This episode will basically look at introducing you to the Piper Warrior, the aircraft which you see on the screen in front of you now. Wonderful payware aircraft from Just Flight. As you can see, the Warrior is a low-wing, single-engined aircraft, and she features a fixed tricycle undercarriage, and the engine at the front drives a two-bladed fixed-pitch propeller. The aircraft we have here has the registration GCAVK, which is named after the channel, and hopefully we'll give it a nice repaint at some point and make it look a little bit more modern. Maybe change the upholstery, and inside it's looking very dated. I say dated, considering the PA-28 type aircraft was first flown in the early 60s, and the Warrior coming in as part of the series at about 1974. And overall there's been about 5,000 of these aircraft produced over that time, with quite a fair few still in active service around the globe, with quite a lot based with flying schools. The aircraft is a fantastic little training aircraft. Has some very good handling characteristics, and is quite a forgiving airframe. Does also make a very good light touring aircraft also. This particular model doesn't come with the wheel fairings, but a lot of privately owned Warriors do have these as part of the package. It gives a few extra knots of cruising speed. The basic cruising speed of this aircraft is around about 100 knots. She has a service ceiling of 13,000 feet at maximum payload. And can fly for a duration of around about 4 hours with full fuel. Let's a quick look at the outside of the aircraft. So just jump into the cockpit. We'll have a quick look at the controls and instrumentation. So join me inside the cockpit. Right, so hello folks, welcome inside the cockpit of the PA-28. So as you can see, it's a very dated looking panel with quite a bit of wear to it. Just goes to show it's been a very used training aircraft over its career. We do have all the old steam gauges. A lot of modern aircraft nowadays, training aircraft, and a lot of your airliners that you go on holidays in, all have the flight instrument screens with all these gauges on a single screen. Makes it all a little bit more nice and easily readable. But this is the traditional layout that you will find of an aircraft of this era. Okay, so just looking down here at the controls then, you can see we have these steering wheel looking contraptions. This is the control yokes. Being a training aircraft, it does have dual controls. So obviously on the left hand side here is for the pilot, right hand side here for the co-pilot. And movement of these controls, you have back, forward, which controls your pitch, so your up and down movement of the nose, and also you can go to the left and to the right, which controls the aircraft in bank angle. And down here on the floor at your feet, no, these aren't some fancy footrests. These are the rudder pedals, so we have a set here for the pilot and a set here for the co-pilot. And pushing on the left pedal, push the rudder to the left on the back of the tail, and likewise to the right, turn the rudder to the right. In the middle here, this big black lever here is the throttle lever, and fully forward with this takes you all the way up to maximum power, coming all the way back to idle, and this base is controls the RPM of the engine, to which the tachometer for that is here. So the red line up here at 2700 RPM, and at that setting the engine develops about 161 horsepower. Typical cruise power is around about 23 to 2400 RPM. Anyway, next to the throttle we have this red lever here. This is the mixture control, fuel mixture control. So fully forward is a full, fully rich mixture, and you can gradually bring this back to lean out the fuel mixture into the carburetor until you come all the way back to fully lean, and also classes cut off. So to stop the engine, we would move this lever all the way to the rear, basically starving the engine of fuel and letting it run down. Underneath the panel here we have our park and brake. So to let that off, basically depress the little handle there, let it go, and that releases the disc brakes on the main undercarriage wheels. To reapply it, we depress the toe brakes and hold the button down and pull the handle, and that re-engages the parking brake. This little dial looking here is, let's just move this throttle out of the way and zoom in. So this dial, little control wheel here, is our rudder trim. So with the torque of the engine, the propeller spinning in a clockwise direction as you look at it from the rear of it here, you get this airflow which spins around the aircraft and hits this massive tail fin here, and you basically need to counteract the yawing tendency of the aircraft with rudder, and sometimes, for instance, when you are climbing with full power, you need to be holding a little bit of right rudder to keep the aircraft balanced with this little balance ball here, and to help you keep flying in a straight line. So, and to control the number the control forces out there, you would move this little control left or right as needed to get that ball centered, stayed. Okay, so a bit of a knock down there. Then we have this funny little lever here. This is our flap lever. So the flaps on the aircraft are just over here. Are these paddles here. So you pull the lever up. 3 stages of flaps on the Warrior. As you can see, that's pulled up. Full flaps extended there. So we'll put the lever down and see the flaps operating. And coming further to the rear flap lever here, we have the pitch trim wheel. Much the same for the explanation of the rudder trim for the rudder pedals. When you are climbing, descending, trying to keep level flight, you don't want to be pushing or pulling on the control yoke, because the aerodynamic force will eventually make your arms fall off. So what we do then is, for instance, if you're climbing and you're holding a little bit of back pressure there to keep the nose on the horizon where you want it, you would add a little bit of pitch trim in to null out the force that you're exerting on the control column, which makes it much nicer to fly and a lot less, makes it a bit more effortless. You can get proficient enough that when you've got the aircraft perfectly trimmed, you can basically fly the plane hands off. Yeah, we are fitted with an autopilot on this one. It's quite lucky. It's quite well equipped, this aircraft, but majority of the time you don't need the autopilot. It's a joy to fly by hand. Like as I say, when you've got the aircraft pitched perfectly, you don't even need to touch the controls. Maybe you'll get a little bit of an upset with wind and just have to put the wings level again, but other than that, it's a beauty to fly hands off. So that is the main controls for actually controlling the aircraft. So if we come up here onto the instrument panel, we'll start from the very top up here, I think. This little gizmo here, this little probe sticking out the window, is our temperature gauge. So this indicates the outside air temperature. Here at Donegal, what are we looking at? We're looking at about 15 degrees. Typical day. Coming down, we have our magnetic compass. It's situated up here because it's far enough away from anything that has any magnetic properties. So this is basically like your normal compass you would find if you were out hiking and reading your map and using your compass to find your way about. This does much the same thing. Points to the direction you're facing. So this is looking at around about 204 degrees. And you would also make sure that your directional gyro here is always corresponding to this magnetic compass. Right, so we come down to these instruments here. So, any pilot would recognise these basic instruments here, the basic T-shape. So in the middle, we have this blue and brown instrument. This is our artificial horizon or attitude direction indicator. So basically, at the moment, it's there's no air going through the gyro at the moment, so it's all toppled. But when the engine's running and the vacuum system is working and spinning the gyros, this instrument will basically come alive, and it will show you the attitude of the aircraft, being this little set of wings and nose pointer here. So if you want to go up or you want to raise the nose, you'd fly this little point into the blue area, and similarly if you want to go down, you point it down into the brown area, with the scale here graduated in degrees of pitch. At the top, it looks at bank angles. You have your pointer here, the yellow pointer, and into a turn, it basically gives indication of how far over your aircraft is banked. So they graduated in 10, 20, 30, 45, 60, and there's one final one down here at 90, but you'd never ever get that far in normal flight. To the left is the airspeed indicator. This is calibrated in knots or nautical miles per hour, and maximum speed of the aircraft is up here at this red band. This is our VNE speed. VNE, the V in our speed stands for velocity. NE is the never exceed speed, so basically it's that red line of 160 knots. The instrument's quite helpful to show us how we are flying the aircraft, in particular what speeds we need for extending the flaps and in the safe region, which should be the green band here. The white band is our operating speed for the flaps, so from about 103 knots all the way down to 44 knots we can operate the flaps safely. 44 knots there at maximum weight is our minimum speed we can go before the aircraft stalls. But we'll come into stalls a little bit later. Moving over to the right hand side of the attitude indicator is our altimeter, and basically is the instrument to read our altitude above sea level or height above the airfield. Currently at the moment, I'll just press the PT to set the barometric pressure, so which will give us at the moment our QNH, which is for our altitude above mean sea level, and we also have another setting which is used usually around the circuit, which is our QFE, which we set here. Spin it around so the dial points to 0. That gives us our height of the airfield. Quite intuitive gauge when you get used to it. 3 dials on there. We'll just go around the outside here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way around to 9 and back to 0. The longer hand reads in 100s of feet, so 100, 200, 300, and so forth. There's a so you can see it. There's a slightly smaller hand here, which reads our altitude in the thousandths. So point here, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, so on and so forth. And then the final one, which is this long thin one here, this is for our 10,000ths of feet. So if we're up at 10,000 feet, you would, let's say 10,500, for instance, then all the hands will be in different places. So the long hand here will be out to 500, the short hand will be just past the 1, and the long thin one here will be at 1. So that would indicate 10,500 feet. As I say, it's very intuitive once you get used to it. There are other types of altimeters that just have the one dial and then a barrel numbers in the inside of the instrument there to indicate your height as a value. More on that later. Anyway, coming down to the instrument below the artificial horizon, this is our direction indicator, and it's basically another gyro instrument which is controlled, it is operated from the vacuum system from the engine, and once all the gyros are spinning up, this sets out our magnetic heading. The only downside to this instrument is it does suffer from drift, so every now and again during your cruise or your checks just before you take off, you'd always make sure this is aligned with the magnetic numbers up here above the glare shield, which it is at the moment. Okay, so that's the basic T configuration of instruments, which every pilot would recognise. There's a couple of other ancillary instruments down to the low left here. This is the turn coordinator and slip ball. So the turn coordinator, which is this little aircraft symbol here, this is used mostly when the aircraft has been instrument flown, and when you're in certain turns, the wings of the aircraft will dip down, and this will show you a standard rate turn. And the 2-minute marking underneath here indicates that when your wings are either here in the left hand turn or here in the right hand turn, you will do a full 360 degree orbit in 2 minutes. But the little bit of the instrument below that, which is the bit mostly concerned with the rudder, this is the slip ball. So as I say, with the torque of the engine and the prop wash going over the fuselage and hitting that tail fin, especially at higher power settings, you'll probably find on this aircraft it will be out to the right a little bit, so you need to counteract that with right rudder to put it back into between these two black lines. And also when you're doing turns, you can either end up slipping into the turn or skidding into the turn. As you turn the aircraft, you add a little bit of rudder to keep the aircraft nice and coordinated. Coming over to the right, as it says on the gauge, vertical speed. This is our vertical speed indicator, and as we're sitting here on the ground at Donegal, not going anywhere, it's reading 0. With the needle pointing up indicates a climb of the aircraft, and similarly, needle pointing down indicates a descent, and it's all graduated in 1, 2, 3, 4, 500, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 1000, and all the way up to a maximum of 2000 feet per minute climb or 2000 feet per minute descent. In this aircraft, it's very hard to do a climb of 2000 feet per minute. Right, okay. Just take you through a couple of other little instruments on here. Very top left here, this is the engine exhaust gas temperature needle. The aircraft I learned to fly didn't have one of these. It's nice to see it included on this aircraft, and as the name suggests, it measures the exhaust gas temperature. Below that, this is our ADF needle and compass card, and so basically you tune into a non-directional beacon on a certain frequency, and now the needle will just point in the direction, but we'll come to that more when we start navigation. To the far right here, again, to do with navigation, this is our OBS 1, OBS 2, and this is linked to the nav 1 and the nav 2 radio panels here. Above those instruments, we've got the annunciator lights. So basically for the vacuum pump, the alternator, and oil pressure and quantity. These will flash up if there's any issues, along with the test switch here, which we test after we've started to make sure they are all working. Right, okay, so we'll just get rid of the yoke. Can't do that in real life, but it makes a very handy feature in Flight Simulator. Going down the bottom of the glare shield then, that's the intercom panel for the left hand side. Below that, this is our very basic autopilot. It's an on-off for the autopilot. We have buttons for heading, nav, approach, and I believe that's reverse course. Never used that myself, but it's always the first time for everything. We may try that in one of the little lessons later on. But a very basic autopilot. The real unit that's featured here doesn't actually have any altitude hold. It's literally just in the lateral planes, but just like in their kind way, have included this little button up here, which is our altitude hold in the simulator. So, thank you very much, Just Flight. Below where the yoke sits, we have our key. So, just like your car. But you'll see some extra settings here. So at the moment it's in off, and we have an R, L both, and start. That's pretty self-explanatory. The R, L and both refer to the magneto systems on the engine. So basically the electrical system for the engine is separate from the battery. That once it's running, it is self-contained, and there's two sets of systems: a right magneto, a left magneto, and most of the time it's set to both. So both are firing the spark plugs in the cylinders. But we do a check of this at certain phases during the running of the aircraft, but we'll come to that. when we do starter. To the right of that, starter warning light, especially check engine light that you would have in your car. The tachometer we've already gone through. To the right of that is the engine primer, so a very old engine this. To start her up on a very cold morning, you need to prime the engine, so to squirt a bit of fuel into the cylinders. Usually 3 pumps of the plunger will do that, and that'll just squirt some fuel into the cylinders to aid in starting combustion. So we have some gauges to the top there. So starting from the left here, this is our left main fuel tank. Fuel is contained on this aircraft in the wings. We have a left tank, a right tank, and useful load of fuel is 50 gallons spread over both tanks. On this aircraft, we can only use one tank at a time, so we have this selected down here at the moment, which is in off, but we can move it around to either select the left tank or the right tank. We'll turn that back to off because we've not got any power going, and we don't want to trickle fuel into the lines. Right, okay, so the next one across here, oil temperature, measured in Fahrenheit, and we'll always make sure that's in the green band. And next to that, fuel pressure. So this is the pressure of the fuel going to the engine. I believe it's in PSI. When the engine's running, you always want to make sure that is in the green band. To the right of that is the oil pressure gauge. So currently it's sat at 0, but normal operation you'd like to see it in this green band here. If you have any issue like an oil leak, you would find the pressure would start dropping, and that would give you cause for concern if you want to get the aircraft back on the ground as soon as possible, because you'd be risking engine failure. So that's those. Okay, so we'll come over to the right hand side of the panel now. Just set the camera up nicely. Right, okay, so put your mouse back. So this panel in front of us here is our radio tuning panel. This controls our communication channels and our navigation radios, which are tied into these 2 instruments here, which I mentioned earlier. So, okay, at the very top we have our audio selector panel, so the different parts of the radio systems. We can either tell it to come out of our microphone headsets, or we can switch it up and it will come through the audio speaker inside the aircraft. Below that we have 3 lights here for the markers, particularly on ILS approaches. For airports that still use these are very rare nowadays to see them, and they basically send out a signal, and each one would light up correspondingly to tell you how far you are on the approach. Next down here is our COM1 radio. As you can see, it's set to 124.85 megahertz. So basically we'd input a frequency in here using the rotary dial here. Also we have the volume for that, to control the volume going out to our headsets. Over to the right, this is our nav1 radio, so we can set a frequency in here and that will give us a let us tune into, for instance, a VOR or an ILS approach if you're on instruments. And again here, volume control, that is for the audio, so you can listen into the identification Morse code for the particular station. Underneath this is exactly the same, but we have COM2 and NAV2. So exactly the same as what you'd find above there, but this is for the second set. Under that, we have our transponder. So any of you don't know what a transponder is, it's basically the truck controller with his radar screen. You can set a particular code in here that is unique to your aircraft. And the controller can see if you, as long as your transponder is on and transmitting, he can see you on his radar screen, which also is very helpful because you can get warnings about other aircraft in your vicinity. So if it's a really bright day, you can't see aircraft very well sometimes, so it's handy for ATC to just give you that little warning, and this helps him know where you are, and other aircraft will have one of these on as well. For the same purpose. Okay, so coming over to the right hand side here, this is our Garmin GPS 100 unit, very basic early generation GPS systems. We'll go through that, and you can also on this aircraft as well, you can also select slightly more modern units, which I'll show you a little bit later. Okay, so underneath this is our DME, distance measuring equipment readout. So for our navigation radios, we can find out how far we are from the station, our speed to or from, and how long it will take us to get there. Underneath this is our ADF tuning panel, so that's similar, or the tuning panel for this gauge over here. So you put in your frequency into here using these rotary dials, same as what you have up here, and it will point to that station you've selected. Okay, so go a bit further in. Just look at our suction gauge. Just get rid of that EFB. So we have the suction gauge. This is for the gyro driven instruments, which is the artificial horizon, the direction indicator, and the tone coordinator. Normal value, you can see it's between 4.8 or 5 inches. If we were to lose the vacuum pump, you would see it down here, and the consequence of this is that the instruments will become unreliable. You won't be able to read them. The attitude indicator would go something like this, and so you would lose the BI and the attack coordinator. They would not work. Anyway, going further down the panel then, so we have our cabin heat and fan controls, emergency bus switch for the avionics, but that's always covered up, don't usually ever need that. Power for the avionics and a fan switch here. Below, rows of circuit breakers. You would check to make sure these are all in, none of them are blown. You can select them on this aircraft, which is quite a nice feature because they all do work. But you would make sure they're all in normal operation. Coming to the left here, we have the ammeter for the alternator. So when that is charging, you'll have reading on here. If you select any additional systems that are electrical, such as like the fuel pump, the lights, it will draw current, which will show on here. To the left of that, we have the carburetor heat control. So this is used for when we're out along flying and we have quite a bit of moisture in the air. It's a very humid day, lower temperatures. We'll use this, put it to on, which will feed some of the hot exhaust gas round to the carburetor to stop any ice forming up, and ice in the carburetor could be very bad for the engine. It means you can't get any air into the engine and potentially will stop the engine. So we'll also use this as well during our checks in the cruise. We'll periodically just put the car heat on for about 10 seconds and then off again, just to stop any ice buildup. We have this little switch here. This is the friction controller for the 2 levers here, and just controls how much effort is required to move these controls. And finally, we come up. This is our electrical switches. So our big red buttons here in 2 halves. The left side here is our battery switch, so this connects all the electrics to the battery. Right hand side of this is the alternator, so that selectively on will make sure you're getting current to the battery, current from the alternator to the battery to keep the battery charged. We have a rotary switch here. This is for controlling the lights and radio panel backlights. This is the nav lights on the end of each wing and the tail of the aircraft. To the right of the battery and alternator switches, we have the electric fuel pump. The fuel pump, main fuel pump on this aircraft is engine driven, but when we need a backup, essentially we have an electric fuel pump, which we'll select this is for takeoff, landing, and when we are selecting the individual wing tanks, when we change those over. To the right of that is the landing light. The landing light on this aircraft is in the nose of the aircraft, just below the propeller. Our anti-collision lights. These are the flashing white strobe lights that are on the end of each wing, and over here. This is our pitot heat switch. The pitot, for those of you who don't know, is if we just go back onto the outside of the aircraft. Right, so if you can see it, this is the pitot head here. So basically what this does, this takes in air and uses that air and measures it to tell us, for instance, our airspeed, etc. So the reason for heating that is if we're in the colder temperatures, more humid areas, we do not want ice to build up in the opening to the pitot head. It will give us very, very erroneous readings. So when we're below certain temperatures, we'll select the pitot heat on, and that will keep that nice and warm. When you check that on your walk around, you switch all these lights and everything on, go around and check them, also that, and you just feel around the pitot head with your hand and it will be warm to the touch. So for now, that is pretty much it in terms of introduction to the aircraft. So we'll leave this video here for the time being, and the next video will be looking at starting the aircraft up and getting us out to the runway and doing that first takeoff. So hopefully you've not found this video too boring. There's a lot of talking just to show you through a quick run through of the aircraft systems and controls. But the next video is where the fun starts. If you did like the video, please do like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be informed of any new videos that do come out on the channel. So for now, bye bye for now.